Can I ask you something before we start tonight? Have you ever waited for someone so long that when they finally came back, you forgot everything you had planned to say? You had rehearsed it 1,000 times, in the car, in the kitchen, in the dark at 3 in the morning when sleep would not come. You knew exactly what you were going to say, and then they were there, right there, and every word you had saved was gone. If you know that feeling, stay with me tonight, because I want to tell you about a woman named Helen, and about 3 years, and about the night her son came home. Helen Marsh was the kind of woman who kept things running. That was how she had always been. Not loudly, not with fanfare, just quietly, steadily, the way a clock keeps time. You don't notice it until it stops. She had raised 2 children in a pale yellow house on a quiet street in a small town in Virginia. Daniel was the older one, serious from the time he could walk. The kind of boy who lined up his toy cars in straight rows and got upset when someone moved them. Who asked questions that made his teachers pause. Who decided at 17 that he was going to serve his country and told his mother at the kitchen table one evening the way he told her most things, directly, without preamble, without softening it. "Mom, I'm enlisting after graduation." Helen had set down her fork. She had looked at her son. She had thought about 17 different things in approximately 4 seconds. Then she had said, "Okay." She had said it the way she said most hard things, quietly, without letting him see what was happening behind it. Her daughter Lisa was 2 years younger than Daniel. She lived 40 minutes away now with her husband and their 2 children. She called on Sundays, she visited on holidays. She loved her mother in the full and genuine way of a daughter who had grown up and built her own life and trusted that her mother was fine. Helen was usually fine. She was very good at being fine. Robert Marsh had died 6 years before the deployment. Heart attack, a Tuesday morning. He had been in the garage fixing something, the way he was always fixing something, and Helen had gone out to call him for breakfast and found him. That was the part she did not tell people, that she had found him. She told them he had died in the garage on a Tuesday morning. She did not tell them the rest. Some things you keep. Robert had been a quiet man, not the same quiet as Helen. Hers was the quiet of someone managing many things at once. His was the quiet of someone who was simply at peace with where he was. He could sit on the back porch for an hour without saying a word and be completely content. Helen had found this both baffling and deeply restful for 31 years. He had loved 3 things above all others: his family, his garden, and the particular sound of a house with children in it. Not the noise exactly, the sound underneath the noise, the evidence of presence. Doors closing, footsteps on stairs, voices from other rooms. He used to say that an empty house had a sound too, and he did not care for it. Helen had understood what he meant. She understood it much better now. After Robert died, Daniel had stayed home an extra year, not because anyone asked him to, not because there was a formal reason. He had simply stayed. He got a job at the hardware store, and he helped with the garden, and he was there in the evenings at the kitchen table, and he never made a thing of it. He just stayed. Helen had never directly thanked him for this. She had not known how to do it without making it too large, without making him feel that the staying had been a sacrifice rather than a choice. She thought about it sometimes, what she should have said, what she still wanted to say. She was saving that, too, for when he came home. The morning Daniel left was a Tuesday in September. The kind of morning that does not know yet that it is the last of its kind for a while. Clear sky, the particular smell of early autumn that Helen could never describe to anyone who had not already felt it. Like something ending, like something beginning, both at once. She had made breakfast. She made his favorite because she did not know what else to do with her hands, and it felt important to do something that said, "I love you," without having to say, "I love you." Because saying, "I love you," that morning would have made something real that she was not ready to make real. Scrambled eggs the way he liked them, soft, with cheese, toast with the good butter, orange juice. He ate most of it. He was quieter than usual that morning. They both were. They talked about small things, the weather, whether he had packed enough socks. She had bought him 3 extra pairs of socks the week before, and he had accepted them without teasing her about it, which told her everything about where his mind was. After breakfast, he carried his bag to the car. She followed him out. The street was quiet. Mrs. Patterson from next door was walking her dog, and she waved. Daniel put his bag in the trunk. He turned around. He was taller than her now, had been for years, but standing in the driveway that morning in the early September light, he looked like someone she had once carried, someone whose fever she had sat up with, someone whose nightmares she had chased away at 2 a.m. with a glass of water and her hand on his forehead. He hugged her. He held on longer than usual. She felt his hand on the back of her head the way she used to hold the back of his when he was small. She breathed. She did not cry. Not yet. Not until the car had turned the corner and disappeared. Not until she was back inside with the door closed and his half-eaten toast still on the plate. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, and she let herself, for exactly 12 minutes. She knew how long because she watched the clock. She had given herself 12 minutes. Then she got up. She washed the dishes. She made the bed. She called Lisa to tell her Daniel had left. Lisa said, "I know, Mom, and I'm so proud of him." Helen said, "Me too." She meant it. Both things were true at the same time. She was proud, and she was sitting at the center of the most specific fear she had ever felt. Both things at once. The days became a shape she had not lived before. She had been a wife, a mother, a woman who moved through a full house. Even after Robert died, she had still had Daniel at home for a while. Now the house was just the house, and she was just herself inside it. She learned the rhythms of alone. Not loneliness exactly. She was careful about that distinction. Loneliness was a feeling. This was a condition, a factual state of being. One person in a house, one coffee cup, one plate, one side of the bed. She filled the days the way she had always filled things, completely and without complaint. She volunteered at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She kept the garden the way Robert had taught her, imperfectly, but with genuine attention. She had lunch with Lisa once a week. She called her sister Margaret in Ohio on Sunday evenings. She went to church. She baked things and gave them to neighbors because baking required both hands and an occupied mind. There was a Tuesday at the library in the first winter when a man came in looking for books on military history. He was older. He had a particular way of moving. She recognized it without being able to name it. She helped him find what he needed. He thanked her. He said, "My grandson is deployed," she said. "My son is too." They stood in the military history section for a few minutes. They did not say very much. They did not need to. He checked out his books. He left. She went back to the desk. She sat there for a moment. She thought. There are other people doing this, right now. Other people in other houses keeping one coffee cup and one plate and checking the weather at night. It did not make it smaller, but it made it less singular. Less like something wrong with her specifically. Just something that was happening. That people survived. She went back to work. There was a Wednesday in the second winter when she baked 3 loaves of bread and had nobody to give them to. She stood in the kitchen with the loaves cooling on the rack. She could bring one to Mrs. Patterson, one to the family across the street who had just had a baby. The third one she would keep. She stood there for a moment longer than necessary. She thought about Robert. He had loved this bread. He had eaten it warm with too much butter and said every time that she should sell it, and she had said every time that she was not going to sell bread from her kitchen, and he had said that was a shame for everyone. She wrapped the third loaf carefully. She put it in the freezer. She was saving it for when Daniel came home. She was aware this was not entirely rational. She saved it anyway. And every night before she went to bed, she picked up her phone. She opened the weather application. She typed in the name of the region where she believed Daniel was. She was not certain. He could not always tell her exactly, but she had a general idea. And she looked at the weather. Not because it changed anything, not because knowing the temperature where he was made him safer or brought him closer, but because it was the one specific factual piece of the world he was in that she could access. And accessing it made her feel not less afraid, just less separate. She had told no one about the weather application, not Lisa, not her sister Margaret, not the women at church who asked about Daniel with warm and genuine concern. It was hers, her small, private thing, the thing she did at the end of every day before she turned off the light. Partly sunny, high of 74. Partly cloudy, high of 81. Rain expected, temperatures dropping. She read the forecasts the way you read the last line of a letter, not for information, for contact. He called when he could. The calls were not always long, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes less. The connection was not always good. She learned to be efficient with the time. She saved up the things she wanted to tell him. Not a list, just a kind of mental accumulation. Things that happened, things she saw. The cardinal that had taken up residence in the garden. The book she had read that he would have opinions about. The way Mrs. Patterson's dog had learned to open the gate and was now conducting unsanctioned tours of the neighborhood. She told him these things quickly, knowing the call could drop, knowing she might not get another for a week. He told her things too, general things, the things he was permitted to tell. He sounded like himself. That was what she listened for, underneath the words, the particular texture of his voice when he was all right, when he was tired but all right, when he was something she could not name but that was still him. She said, "I love you," at the end of every call. He said it back, always, without hesitation. She held on to that. She kept it with her through the days and the nights and the weather checks and the dinners for one and the Tuesdays at the library and the Sundays at church. I love you, always, without hesitation. There was a night in the second year when she called his number after a bad dream. It was 3 a.m. She knew he would not answer. She knew the call would not go through. She called anyway. She held the phone and listened to whatever the connection would give her, static or silence, or the faint automated sound of a network trying to find something it could not find. She did not leave a voicemail. She just held the phone for a few minutes. Then she put it down. She lay in the dark. She thought about Daniel at 17, lining up his toy cars, asking questions that made his teachers pause, telling her directly, without preamble, "Mom, I'm enlisting after graduation." She had said, "Okay." She thought about what was behind that okay. All the things she had thought in approximately 4 seconds, what she had not said, what she had decided not to say. Because some things a mother keeps to herself. Because some things you choose not to put on the person who is leaving. Because the leaving is hard enough without the weight of your fear added to it. She lay in the dark and she thought, "Come home." Not out loud, just in the way of a thought that was also a prayer. Just the 2 words, "Come home." She thought it the way she had thought, "I am lucky," when she looked at Robert across a room 30 years ago, without saying it, holding it. Come home. She fell asleep sometime after 4. In the morning she got up, she made her coffee, she checked the weather. Partly cloudy, high of 68. She went to the library. Lisa came to visit one afternoon in the 2nd year. She brought the grandchildren. They ate lunch in the kitchen, and the children ran in the yard, and afterward, when they were sitting with their tea, the children had gone to watch something in the living room, and the kitchen was quiet. Lisa said, "Mom, are you okay? Really?" Helen said, "I'm fine, sweetheart." Lisa said, "I know you say that. I'm asking if it's true." Helen looked at her daughter. Lisa had Robert's eyes, the directness behind them, the way of asking a question that made it clear she was actually waiting for an answer. Helen said, "Some days are harder than others." Lisa said, "Which days?" Helen thought about this honestly. She said, "The quiet ones. The ones where nothing in particular happens, where there's nothing to fill the time with except the fact of him being gone." Lisa said, "I'm sorry, Mom." Helen said, "Don't be sorry. He's doing what he chose to do, what he needed to do." She paused. She said, "I'm proud of him every single day. I just miss him every single day, too." Both things at the same time. Lisa reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's. She said, "I miss him too. But I think I don't worry the way you do." Helen said, "No, you don't." She said it without accusation, just as a fact. The way there are things only a mother carries, not because others don't love enough, because the love takes a different form, a different weight. Lisa said, "Is there anything I can do?" Helen thought about this. She said, "Come for lunch on Wednesdays, not just Sundays." Lisa said, "Okay." She said it immediately, without checking her calendar, without asking what week, just, "Okay." Helen nodded. Lisa started coming on Wednesdays, every Wednesday for the rest of the deployment. She brought the children sometimes. Sometimes she came alone. They ate lunch in the kitchen. They talked about small things and large things and everything in between. And on those Wednesday afternoons, the house was not just a house, and Helen was not just herself inside it. She was a mother, with her daughter across the table, and that was not nothing. That was everything that was available. And she held it the same way she held the weather forecasts. Not because it solved anything, because it kept her connected to the world she was still living in while she waited for the one she wanted back. The call came on a Thursday morning in November. Helen was in the garden pulling up the last of the summer plants. Her phone rang. She pulled off her glove. She looked at the screen. Daniel. She sat down on the garden bench. She answered. He said, "Mom?" She said, "I'm here." He said, "I'm coming home." 2 words, coming home. She had heard these words in her mind 1,000 times. She had rehearsed this moment. The airport, what she would wear, what she would say. She had a whole speech, not a formal speech, just the things she had been saving. All the accumulation of 3 years. The cardinal, the dog in the gate, the book he would have opinions about, the man at the library with his grandson deployed, the bread in the freezer, what she had wanted to say about the year he stayed after Robert died. All the things she had been saving for when she could say them to his face. She sat on the garden bench with the phone against her ear. She said, "When?" He said, "Soon. I can't tell you exactly, but soon." She said, "Okay." She said it the way she had said it the morning he left, quietly, without letting him hear what was happening behind it. He said, "Mom." She said, "I know." He said, "I'll call you when I land." She said, "I'll be here." She hung up. She sat on the garden bench, the November garden around her, everything pulled back and waiting. The way gardens wait in November, patient, certain that spring is coming even when everything looks like it is ended. She sat there for a long time. She did not cry. She had cried enough. She was done with the crying part. She was in the coming home part now. She went inside. She called Lisa. Lisa answered on the second ring. Helen said, "He's coming home." There was a silence. Then Lisa made a sound that was not quite a word. Then she said, "Mom?" Helen said, "I know." Lisa said, "I'm coming over." Helen said, "You don't have to." Lisa said, "I'm coming over." She came over. She sat at the kitchen table and watched her mother cook, and neither of them talked very much. They did not need to. There was something in the kitchen that afternoon that had not been there for 3 years. Not joy, exactly. Something quieter than joy. Something more like the feeling when a sound you have been tensed against finally stops, and the silence that comes after is not empty, just different. Just relief. She made everything. She was aware on some level that she was making too much food, that one person coming home for one dinner did not require the preparation she was undertaking. She made his favorite soup. She made the bread from the recipe Robert's mother had written out on a card 50 years ago. The card was soft with handling now, spotted with ingredients from decades of Sunday afternoons. She took the loaf from the freezer, the one she had saved in the second winter when she had nobody to give the third loaf to. She put it on the counter to thaw. She made the apple cake he had asked for every birthday since he was 9. Lisa sat at the table and peeled apples, and they worked together in the warm kitchen and talked about Daniel, about when he was small, the toy cars, the questions, the way he had stayed that year after Robert died without anyone asking. Lisa said, I didn't know that was as hard for you as it was. Helen said, I didn't want you to worry. Lisa said, Mom. Helen said, I know. Lisa said, You should have told me. Helen said, Yes, I should have. She said it without defensiveness, just honestly. Yes, I should have. Some habits are hard to break. The habit of managing things alone, of being fine, of keeping the harder things private so as not to burden the people you love. She had learned this habit over a lifetime. She was still learning when to put it down. Lisa put down her apple and looked at her mother. She said, I'm right here, Mom. I've always been right here. Helen said, I know you have. She said, I know. She looked at her daughter, Robert's eyes, his directness, his way of being completely present when he was in a room. She said, You're very like your father. Lisa said, I know. You've told me. Helen said, I'll keep telling you. Lisa smiled. Helen went back to the soup. The kitchen was warm. The bread was thawing on the counter. The apple cake was in the oven. And they waited, together, the way waiting is better when you do not have to do it alone. She was at the kitchen table with her tea when she heard it. A car in the street, a door, footsteps on the path, a knock on the door. Not the bell, the knock. The particular knock she had known her whole life. The one that said it was him before the door was open. She stood up. Lisa stood up. Helen walked to the door. She was not shaking. She had thought she would be shaking. She was very still. She opened the door. He was standing on the porch, taller somehow. Or maybe she had forgotten the exact dimension of him. He was in civilian clothes. He looked tired in the way of someone who has traveled a very long way. He had a bag over one shoulder. He was looking at her. She looked at him. All the words she had saved, 3 years of accumulation, the cardinal, the dog, the book, the weather checks, the 3 a.m. phone call she had made and never told him about, the 12 minutes she had allowed herself the morning he left, the glass she kept in his spot at the table, the bread in the freezer, what she had wanted to say about the year he stayed. All of it. Gone. Just gone. She stepped forward. He stepped forward. She put her arms around her son. He put his arms around his mother. She felt his hand on the back of her head, the same way he had held her in the driveway 3 years ago. The same way she had held the back of his head when he was small and frightened. She breathed. The smell of him, different. And underneath that, the same. He said, "Hi, Mom." She said, "Hi." That was all. That was everything. They stood on the porch for a long time. The November afternoon around them, quiet. The kind of quiet that is not empty. The kind that is so full it has no room for words. He came inside. Lisa was standing in the hallway. He looked at his sister. She looked at him. She said, "You look terrible." He said, "I've been traveling for 30 hours. She said, "I made apple cake." He said, "You made apple cake?" She said, "Mom made apple cake. I peeled the apples." He looked at Helen. Helen said, "Sit down. I'll get you soup." He sat at the kitchen table. She put a bowl of soup in front of him. He ate it the way he had always eaten her soup, without speaking at first, just eating. She sat across from him. Lisa sat beside her. They watched him eat. He looked up. He said, "This is the soup?" She said, "Yes." He said, "I thought about this soup." She said, "I know. I made it." He almost smiled. He said, "I know you know." She said, "There's also bread and apple cake." He looked at the counter. He saw the loaf she had taken from the freezer. He said, "Is that the bread from the recipe?" She said, "Robert's mother's recipe. Yes." He said, "You made that for tonight?" She paused. She said, "I made it in the second winter. I saved it for you." He looked at her. She said, "I put it in the freezer." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Mom." She said, "Eat your soup." He ate his soup. Lisa poured tea. The kitchen was warm. The apple cake cooled on the counter. The clock on the wall marked the hour. Outside, the November afternoon went on being November. Inside, everything was different. Inside, everything was the same. Both things at once. Later that evening, after the soup and the bread and the apple cake and the second piece of apple cake he asked for, after Lisa had gone home to her family with a piece of cake wrapped in foil and the particular expression of someone who has had a good day, after the conversation that moved slowly and easily through 3 years of accumulated things, the cardinal. He asked about the cardinal, and she told him everything. The dog and the gate. He laughed. The actual laugh. The one she had kept in her memory and checked against sometimes at night, the way she checked the weather, to make sure she still had it right. She still had it right. After all of that, he said, "Mom." She said, "Yes." He said, "How did you do it? 3 years." She thought about how to answer. She said, "1 day at a time." He said, "That's not an answer." She said, "I know." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I checked the weather every night before I went to bed, the weather where I thought you were." He looked at her. She said, "I know it sounds strange." He said, "It doesn't sound strange." She said, "It just made me feel a little closer, knowing whether it was raining there, whether you were cold." He was quiet. Then he said, "It was raining a lot the first winter." She said, "I know. I watched it." He looked at the table. He looked up. He said, "Every night?" She said, "Every night." He said, "I didn't know that." She said, "I know you didn't." She said, "Some things a mother keeps to herself." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held his. He said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "Okay." He said, "The year I stayed, after Dad died." She said, "You don't have to." He said, "I want to." She was quiet. He said, "I stayed because I needed to, not because you needed me." She looked at him. He said, "I wasn't ready to leave yet, and being here, being useful, it helped me." He said, "So whatever you were going to say about it being a sacrifice, it wasn't. It was the other way." Helen looked at her son. She thought about the thing she had been saving, what she had wanted to say. She said, "I was going to thank you." He said, "I know." She said, "I still want to." He said, "Okay." She said, "Thank you for staying, whether it was for you or for me or for both of us. Thank you." He nodded. They sat for a while without speaking. Then she got up and checked the weather on her phone. Old habit. She almost put the phone down without saying anything. Then she turned the screen toward him. She said, "Partly cloudy, high of 52 tomorrow." He looked at the screen. He looked at her. He said, "In Virginia." She said, "In Virginia. You're home now. I know where you are." Something crossed his face. She recognized it. It was the thing that had been behind his eyes when he ate the soup, behind the smile, behind the hand on the back of her head, the thing that was too large for any of the words they had used all evening. He said, "Yes." He said it quietly, the way you say something that is also a relief. "I'm home." She nodded. She put the phone down. She said, "I'm going to bed." She kissed the top of his head the way she had done since he was small. She said, "Good night, Daniel." He said, "Good night, Mom." She walked down the hall. She stopped at his door. She opened it. The room exactly as he had left it. The books, the desk, the photograph, both of them squinting into the sun. She looked at it for a moment. She did not remember what they had been laughing at. She thought she might ask him tomorrow. She closed the door. She went to her room. She got into bed. She picked up her phone. She opened the weather application. She looked at it for a moment. Partly cloudy, high of 52, Virginia. She smiled. She put the phone down. She turned off the light. She did not check the weather in any other place. There was no other place to check. He was home, right there, down the hall, breathing, safe, home. She closed her eyes. She thought, "I am a lucky woman." She thought it the way she thought most important things, without saying it out loud, just holding it. In the particular full dark of a house that was no longer just a house. In the particular quiet of a night that was no longer just a night. In the particular peace of a woman who had waited 3 years and checked the weather every single evening and kept a glass in a spot at the table and baked a loaf of bread and put it in the freezer in the second winter because she was saving it for when he came home, and had just held her son on the porch while November went quiet around them. I am a lucky woman. She was asleep before the clock struck the hour. Before I let you go tonight, I want to ask you something. Is there someone you are waiting for right now? Not necessarily someone deployed, just someone you are waiting for. Someone who is far away in some way. Someone you have been rehearsing for, saving things up for, checking on in whatever small, private way you have found. The weather, or a voicemail you call just to hear, or a glass kept in a spot at the table, or a room left exactly as it was, or a loaf of bread in the freezer. If there is someone, I want you to know that the waiting is not nothing. The checking is not nothing. The 12 minutes you allow yourself and then get up and wash the dishes, that is not nothing. That is love in its most enduring form. The kind that does not require the other person to see it. The kind that just continues, quietly, every day, whether anyone knows or not. And if that person comes home, you will forget everything you planned to say, and it will not matter, because they will be there, right there, and you will know what to do. You will have always known. Hold on. Good night. Thank you for spending this evening with me. Come back next week. The chair is here, the coffee is on, and I will be right here waiting for you. Same as always. There are things about Helen that nobody knew. Not Lisa, not her sister Margaret in Ohio, not the women at church who asked about Daniel with warm and genuine concern. Things she carried the way she carried everything, quietly, without making it anyone else's problem. She had been carrying things quietly her whole life. Her mother had been the same way. A woman from a generation that did not discuss the interior of things, that kept the difficult parts private and presented the world with a composed and functional face. Helen had absorbed this the way children absorb the things their parents model, not taught, just shown. For most of her life she had considered this a strength, a form of dignity. After Robert died, she had begun to wonder if it was also a kind of loneliness, a self-imposed one, the kind you create by deciding that your inner life is nobody else's business. She had been very good at being fine. She was not always fine. She was fine in the sense that she got up every morning and made her coffee and went to the library and kept the garden and called her sister and did everything a person is supposed to do. She was fine in the way that meant she was not falling apart. She was not fine in the way that meant nothing was hard. Those were different things. She had kept them carefully separate. During the deployment she had found, slowly and without entirely intending to, that some of the things she had been keeping private were harder to keep private than they used to be. Not because she said them out loud, because they got heavier. 3 years is a long time to be the only person who knows the weight of a thing. There was a Sunday in the third winter when she sat in church and the choir sang a hymn she had not heard in years, a hymn Robert had loved. She had not expected it. She had not been prepared. The woman sitting beside her, a woman named Dorothy, whom Helen knew slightly, had reached over without saying anything and put her hand over Helen's, just for a moment, just briefly. Then the hymn ended and Dorothy moved her hand and the service continued. Helen had not looked at her. She had been afraid that if she looked at her, she would not be able to hold it together. She held it together. After the service, Dorothy had said simply, "My husband was in Korea." Nothing else, just that. And Helen had understood that this was Dorothy saying, "I know." Not the specifics, not the details, just, "I know what it is to sit in a pew and hold something too large for the space you are sitting in. I know what it is to wait." Helen had said thank you. She had not known exactly what she was thanking her for. Everything, probably. The hand, the understanding, the not needing to explain. She had thought about Dorothy often after that Sunday, about how much it had meant. A hand for a moment, a few words, "I know." She had thought about all the things she had not said to people who might have benefited from hearing them. "I know. I see you. You are not doing this alone, even though it feels that way." She had not said these things because she had assumed people could manage the way she managed. She was beginning to understand that managing was not the same as not needing. That being capable of carrying something alone was different from it being good to carry it alone. She had started, slowly and imperfectly, to say more. Not everything. She was not built for everything. But more than she had before. She told Lisa about the Wednesdays. She told Dorothy at church that the hand on the hymn Sunday had meant more than she knew. She told her sister Margaret, on a Sunday call in February, that some nights were harder than others, and Margaret had said, "I know," and it had helped. Small things, all of them small, but accumulating, the way small things do when you let them, into something that was not quite the same as the life before, but was still a life, a real one, being lived. The garden in the spring of the 3rd year. Helen was out there on a Saturday morning when the first real warmth came. The kind of warmth that means it, not a tease, not a false start. The kind that comes with a particular quality of light that the body recognizes before the mind does. She was working in the bed along the back fence where Robert had planted something years ago that came back every spring and that she had never been able to identify properly. Small purple flowers, determined, every spring without fail. She had stopped trying to identify them, she just let them come back. She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling up the winter debris from around them when she heard Mrs. Patterson at the fence. "Good morning, Helen." She looked up. Mrs. Patterson was there with the dog, who was looking at Helen with the mild, suspicious interest he brought to most situations. Helen said good morning. Mrs. Patterson said, "The garden is looking well." Helen said, "It's getting there." There was a pause. Mrs. Patterson said, "How long now?" Helen knew what she was asking. She said, 3 years in September. Mrs. Patterson said, "My brother was in Vietnam." Helen looked at her. Mrs. Patterson said, "He came home, eventually." She said it with the particular weight of the word eventually. Helen understood the weight. Helen said, "I'm glad." Mrs. Patterson said, "You'll be glad too, soon." She said it with such complete certainty that for a moment Helen felt it. Not hope exactly. Something more solid than hope. Something that came from a woman who had waited for her brother and had been right to wait. The dog pulled at the leash. Mrs. Patterson said, "Come on, Archie." She walked on. Helen went back to her garden, the small purple flowers coming back, the same as every year, without being asked, without needing to be tended particularly, just returning, because that was what they did. She thought, soon. She thought it the way Mrs. Patterson had said it, with certainty. The night before the call came, Helen had a dream about Robert. She did not often dream about him. When she did, the dreams were usually ordinary. He was just there, in the kitchen or the garden, doing something unremarkable. This dream was the same. He was in the garden. It was summer in the dream. He was looking at the small purple flowers along the back fence. He did not know what they were called either. He had just planted them because he liked them. He looked up at her the way he had always looked at her, the particular steadiness of it. He said, "It's almost time." She said, "I know." He said, "You did well." She said, I had help." He nodded. The dream ended the way dreams end, without ceremony. She woke up in the dark. She lay there for a while. She picked up her phone. The weather. Partly cloudy, high of 58. She put the phone down. She thought about Robert in the garden with the purple flowers. It's almost time. She fell back asleep. In the morning, the phone rang. "Daniel, I'm coming home." The days between the call and the knock on the door were the strangest days. She knew he was coming. She did not know when exactly. She existed in a state she had no previous experience of, not waiting exactly, not arrived yet either. Something in between, something that had its own particular texture. She cleaned things that did not need cleaning. She rearranged things that did not need rearranging. She stood in the doorway of his room several times and looked at the photograph and thought about asking him what they had been laughing at. She took the bread out of the freezer the first evening. She looked at it on the counter. She put it back. Too soon. She would take it out when she knew he was close. Lisa called every day. Her sister Margaret called twice. Dorothy from church brought over a casserole, which Helen accepted with more gratitude than the casserole perhaps warranted, but which was really gratitude for the understanding behind it, for the "I know" behind it. She went to the library on Tuesday. She worked her usual hours. On the way home, she passed the hardware store where Daniel had worked the year he stayed. She had driven past it 1,000 times. This time, she stopped. She sat in the car for a moment. She thought about him at that age, working the register, coming home in the evenings, smelling like sawdust and machine oil, sitting at the kitchen table in the evenings without needing to be asked, just there, just present. She thought about what he had told her. "I stayed because I needed to, not because you needed me." She thought that was probably not the whole truth. She thought it was probably true enough. She thought that was what love looked like sometimes. Something that served two people at once. Something that looked like sacrifice from one angle and something else from another. She drove home. She took the bread out of the freezer. She set it on the counter. She thought, soon. She thought it with certainty, the way Mrs. Patterson had said it, the way the purple flowers came back every spring, the way she had always known underneath everything that the waiting had an end. She put the soup on. She got out the card with Robert's mother's recipe, soft with handling, spotted with decades. She made the bread. She started the apple cake. She was in the middle of peeling apples when Lisa arrived at the door. She had not called. She had just come. Helen let her in. Lisa sat at the table and picked up an apple and a peeler without being asked. They worked together in the warm kitchen, not talking very much, not needing to. The soup bubbling on the stove, the bread dough rising, the apple cake waiting. The afternoon light coming through the kitchen window, the way it always came through that window. The way it had come through when the children were small, and the house was full, and Robert sat at the end of the table with his quiet contentment. The way it would keep coming through long after all of them. Just the light, just the window, just the kitchen where a woman was cooking because her son was coming home, and she did not know what else to do with her hands. She was at the kitchen table with her tea when she heard it. A car in the street. A door. Footsteps on the path. A knock on the door. Not the bell. The knock. The particular knock she had known her whole life. The one that said it was him before the door was open. She stood up. Lisa stood up. Helen walked to the door. She was not shaking. She had thought she would be shaking. She was very still. She opened the door. He was standing on the porch, taller somehow. Or maybe she had forgotten the exact dimension of him. He was in civilian clothes. He looked tired in the way of someone who has traveled a very long way. He had a bag over one shoulder. He was looking at her. She looked at him. All the words she had saved. 3 years of accumulation. The cardinal, the dog, the book, the weather checks, the 3 a.m. phone call, the 12 minutes, the glass in his spot at the table, the bread in the freezer. What she had wanted to say about the year he stayed, all of it, gone, just gone. She stepped forward. He stepped forward. She put her arms around her son. He put his arms around his mother. She felt his hand on the back of her head, the same way he had held her in the driveway 3 years ago. The same way she had held the back of his head when he was small and frightened. She breathed. The smell of him. Different. And underneath that, the same. He said, "Hi, Mom." She said, "Hi." That was all. That was everything. They stood on the porch for a long time, the November afternoon around them. Quiet. The kind of quiet that is not empty. The kind that is so full it has no room for words. He came inside. Lisa was standing in the hallway. He looked at his sister. She looked at him. She said, "You look terrible." He said, "I've been traveling for 30 hours. She said, "I made apple cake." He said, "You made apple cake?" She said, "Mom made apple cake. I peeled the apples." He looked at Helen. Helen said, "Sit down. I'll get you soup." He sat at the kitchen table. She put a bowl of soup in front of him. He ate it the way he had always eaten her soup, without speaking at first, just eating. She sat across from him. Lisa sat beside her. They watched him eat. He looked up. He said, "This is the soup." She said, "Yes." He said, "I thought about this soup." She said, "I know. I made it." He almost smiled. He said, "I know you know." She said, "There is also bread and apple cake." He looked at the counter. He saw the loaf. He said, "Is that the bread from the recipe?" She said, "Robert's mother's recipe, yes." He said, "You made that for tonight?" She paused. She said, "I made it in the second winter. I saved it for you." He looked at her. She said, "I put it in the freezer." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Mom." She said, "Eat your soup." He ate his soup. Lisa poured tea. The kitchen was warm. The apple cake cooled on the counter. The clock on the wall marked the hour. Outside, the November afternoon went on being November. Inside, everything was different. Inside, everything was the same. Later that evening, after the soup and the bread and the apple cake and a second piece of apple cake, after Lisa had gone home with cake wrapped in foil, After the conversation that moved slowly and easily through 3 years of accumulated things, he said, "Mom, how did you do it? 3 years." She said, "One day at a time." He said, "That's not an answer." She said, "I know." She said, "I checked the weather. Every night before I went to bed, the weather where I thought you were." He said, "It doesn't sound strange." She said, "It was raining a lot the first winter." He said, "I know. I watched it." He looked at the table. He looked up. He said, "Every night?" She said, "Every night." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. He said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "Okay." He said, "The year I stayed, after Dad died, I stayed because I needed to, not because you needed me." She said, "I know." She said, "I still want to thank you." He said, "Okay." She said, "Thank you for staying, for the year you gave me, whether it was for you or for me or both of us. Thank you." He nodded. They sat for a while. Then she got up and checked the weather on her phone. Old habit. She turned the screen toward him. She said, "Partly cloudy, high of 52 tomorrow." He said, "In Virginia." She said, "In Virginia. You're home now. I know where you are." He said, "Yes." He said it quietly, the way you say something that is also a relief. She put the phone down. She said, "Good night, Daniel." He said, "Good night, Mom." She walked down the hall. She stopped at his door. She opened it. The room exactly as he had left it, the books, the desk, the photograph, both of them squinting into the sun. Tomorrow she would ask him what they had been laughing at. She closed the door. She went to her room. She picked up her phone. Partly cloudy, high of 52, Virginia. She smiled. She put the phone down. She turned off the light. He was home. Right there, down the hall, breathing, safe, home. She closed her eyes. I am a lucky woman. Just holding it, in the full dark of a house that was no longer just a house, in the quiet of a night that was no longer just a night. She was asleep before the clock struck the hour. Before I let you go tonight, is there someone you are waiting for? Not necessarily someone deployed, just someone you are waiting for. Someone you have been checking on in whatever small private way you have found. The weather, or a voicemail you call just to hear, or a glass in a spot at the table, or a loaf of bread in the freezer. I want you to know that the waiting is not nothing. The 12 minutes you allow yourself and then get up and wash the dishes, that is not nothing. That is love in its most enduring form. The kind that does not require the other person to see it, the kind that just continues, quietly, every day, whether anyone knows or not. And if you are that person for someone else, the one being waited for, I want you to know something too. There is someone who checks the weather where you are, someone who keeps your glass in your spot, someone who has a speech prepared, and when you come home, they will forget every word of it, and it will not matter, because you will be there, and they will know what to do. They have always known. Hold on. Good night. Thank you for spending this evening with me. Come back next week. The chair is here. The coffee is on, and I will be right here waiting for you, same as always.